Fereshta Abbasi, thank you so much for coming on the show to tell your story. You've got an incredibly inspiring one. I have known you from the very first day I went to Kabul for the first time in 2018. It was a day after Nowruz, and we met at a friend's house, and we've known each other ever since. So thank you so much.
Thanks so much for inviting me. Very sorry for cutting you, but the very first sentence that you said took me years back to Kabul. And I think the second time we met was in a cafe in Kabul, in Taj Begum, which is run by Layla Haidari, an amazing individual who is still fighting back in Afghanistan.
Yeah, and ever since I've known you, but the story of you, not just that is inspiring, as I said, but also you've always been on the move. Yours is the story of Afghanistan as it has been for a lot of people, that you were born in exile, you were born a refugee. So you were born in Iran, you were born a refugee. Now, how far can your memories go back to your time in Iran as a child?
I think I remember everything very vividly. When I was a child in Iran, when I was going to school, I remember everything about Iran. And in a sense, Iran always felt home for me. And I have said this sentence many times, I'm going to say it again here, that I always feel that my life has been shaped around the conflict in Afghanistan. As you said, I was born as a refugee in Iran, and then my parents decided to move back to Afghanistan after 9/11. They were hopeful as much as every Afghan was at the time. And then, with the Taliban taking over Afghanistan again, here I am living in the UK in exile. Looking back into my life, as you said, it's not only being on the move. I think my life, I can define my life as an everyday fight, basically. I do identify myself as a fighter, as a rights defender at some points, fighting for my individual rights, but again, for the generation that I was born in and the generation that we were there. And I have lived through very hopeful days of Kabul too.
Yeah, you mentioned Kabul again. I mean, when we first met, there were a group of friends who I was meeting for the first time, and then I was entirely new to the whole thing. And that was, in a sense, what Kabul had become. You were the products of what Kabul had become, what Afghanistan had become, which we'll talk about in a bit. But on your childhood, now, how aware were you when you were growing up in Iran? I mean, for many people, the experience of being a refugee in Iran has been a difficult one. Mm-hmm. And how was it for you, and what were the impacts of that on you when you went back to Afghanistan? Which year did you go back?
2004 was the year that it was for me, it was not the return back to Kabul, because I was born in Iran. I had never seen Afghanistan. It was the first time that I was seeing Afghanistan. It was the first time I was meeting my cousins, my uncles, my grandparents. And it wasn't a struggle at the beginning, because I remember that I was born, and the first accent that I learned as a child was the Iranian the Iranian version of Farsi. And I remember when we returned back to Afghanistan, it took me a while to learn Dari, which was the predominant accent in Kabul, and then later Hazaragi, which was part of my identity. But going back to the experience of Iran, as you mentioned, I think even as a child, when I was 5 or 6 years old, I still could see that I don't relate to this country, because you would see it every day. I mean, it was a discriminatory life. As an Afghan refugee in Iran, I did not have the right to education. I was kicked out of school many times. I remember that how difficult it was for my parents to send me to school, because on a policy level, Iran is not bound by any international human rights convention when it comes to Afghan refugees, and that's why I did not have the right to education. And I'm mentioning this because this is something that has been in my memory since ever. When in 2004, my parents decided to return back to Afghanistan, the only thing that my dad told me was that we are going back to our country, and that's going to be your country. No one will ever be able to kick you out of school in Afghanistan. And I came back to Afghanistan with excitement, with this pride that it's my country. And I think that was the first time ever when we crossed the border to Herat. We came by land. And Herat, I felt, and as a child, I still had that feeling that this is home and this is where I belong to. And it was for the first time ever I knew where Afghanistan is. But I was looking around, and I was seeing people who did not look to me as someone who does not belong to this country, the way that we were being treated in Iran. In your everyday life, I could definitely see that. I mean, at the beginning as a child, of course, you don't know where you are, where are you from, especially if you're speaking the language, if you're born in that country, if you're being brought up by all those cultural values. But I remember that even 5, 6 years old children who were playing with me were telling me that, well, you're Afghani, you're from Afghanistan, you don't belong to this country, go back to your country. And I even didn't know what is happening in my country. Why am I in Iran? Why we're not in Afghanistan right now?
And you spent some of your time, or at least your schooling years, in Herat, right?
I mean, that came, and living in Herat came a little bit later in my life, because from Iran, we actually moved to Ghazni, and then to Kabul, and then to Herat. So I have lived in different provinces in Afghanistan too. I was very excited about coming to Afghanistan, and the first time ever meeting my cousins, people who related to me by blood, and I never knew who they are, how old they are, what they're doing. And they were all interesting for me. And I remember that I was not able to communicate in the first days because they were all speaking Hazaragi, and I was not used to that. I remember that still I had a very, very strong Iranian accent. The words that I used was different. And there were things, I mean, there were objects around us. I even didn't know how to call them, because just imagine that I was born in Tehran. I grew up in Tehran. And then from Tehran, I was I was being moved to Ghazni, but to a village in Nahor district of Ghazni, where my grandparents were living, and we were there for a month. And I mean, it's even speaking of it now, it looks surreal for me, but that was the experience I had. I was trying to communicate with everyone, and everyone had lots of questions. I remember the kids getting around me, asking me how Iran looked like, what the TV is. I remember that. I mean, at the time, my grandparents did not have a television. So people were asking me that, is it true that it's a box that you can see pictures? How tall the buildings are in Iran, and all of those. And for me, it was the first time to be able to walk around we had our own garden, but also like lots of trees. And then it was the first time that I could pick a fruit from a tree was in my father's village. So it took me a little while to go to Herat. And by the time I was in Herat, I was a totally different person.
And is it the Herat is where you went to university as well? So you studied law?
Herat is where I went to university. Yes. Herat is where I went to university. But before that, I had lived in Ghazni and then Kabul for a while. So I was a very different person. When I went to Herat, I was around 18, 19 years old. I was very different. My character had changed, and I mean, to me, moving from Kabul to Herat was I definitely felt the difference of living in Kabul and Herat. I mean, it was still back in 2000. I'm speaking of 2008 and 2009, when I went to high school in Herat, and then later admitted to the Herat law school, and I could see that Herat was culturally more conservative than Kabul. It was used to live in Kabul, and it was difficult for me to fit in that box. And I remember at the university, we had our own circle. In the university, I was being known to be from Kabul because I was speaking. that was when I then learned to speak Dari with a Kabuli accent. So everyone thought I'm from Kabul, and everyone thought that, well, she's different. It's because she's coming from a different province. Even though I lived in Herat for quite a few years, and I mean, Herat feels home for me, but definitely there's a lot of cultural differences from Herat and Kabul. And moving back to Afghanistan, I mean, at the beginning, as I told that, I felt that this Afghanistan will feel home. I learned a lot throughout the journey that even in Afghanistan, there were provinces that I felt I don't belong to, or there were pushbacks as if you don't belong to. Of course, I was not from Herat, I was not from Kabul, I was from Ghazni, and I lived in Ghazni a very short period of my time. But there was a lot of things that I learned throughout that. I mean, I learned Hazaragi very late. And I mean, I remember I used to refuse to speak the Hazaragi accent, because 2005, 2006, those years when we were going to school, it was not something usual to speak to Hazaragi. And I remember I had a classmate from Jawghari district of Ghazni, Ruqya. She came from Jawghari, so she was attending school every day, and she was speaking in this strong Hazaragi accent, and everyone was laughing at her. And I remember that her biology teacher used to deliberately call on her to explain the lecture that she had to us. So she explains everything in Hazaragi accent, and everyone else is laughing at her. Seeing all of those, I refused to speak Hazaragi, and I was trying to prove to myself I was trying to find those roots that I belong somewhere, and I wanted to look like as if I'm from Kabul, or if I speak.
But it does give you the idea of how much pressure were there on somebody like you to assimilate quickly in whatever conditions you found yourself. Whether you were in Herat, you had to make sure that you looked in a certain way, spoke in a certain way to make sure that you fit in. I suppose that takes a lot of energy and time and effort to continuously put yourself into a position where you're accepted. Mm-hmm. And as normal, shall I say, but in the same manner that if you spend time in Kabul, you have to find ways that you belong there, that you speak in the same way as you do. I mean, I had in one of the previous episodes, we had Pashna Durrani, who was born as a refugee in Pakistan and went to Afghanistan. And she said, I found Kabul incredibly difficult because I didn't belong there, and people were not allowing me, give me the opportunities to show that I am really part of this city. Kabul was alien to me as much as, for example, any city in Pakistan was. It was because of the people. And now there is also this derogatory term, Irani gag, that anyone who've been to Iran went to Afghanistan. I mean, at that time, it became very competitive. I remember when I was in Pakistan, 2002, 2003, we had people who were learning English, who were able to speak English a bit and had a certain level of education. Because of so much demand on their skills, they were leaving, Pakistan in their droves to go and get work. I suppose it would have been the same with people who had a certain level of education that were in demand in Iran, former refugees who returned, and they created this vibrant communities in different cities. For example, they had a huge cultural impact in Kabul. Those who'd returned from Iran, they knew Persian literature and all that. So were you boxed in this Irani gag labeled outsider who do not belong, and you've come here and taken our space?
I mean, I'm actually very good in adapting accents quickly. So I was never labeled as Irani gag because I think, in a matter of few weeks, I started speaking the native Kabuli accent. And I was, living in Kabul, and I could see that if I was speaking with Iranian accent, of course, people were treating you differently. As you said, there was this label. And the fact that you would have been pushed as if you don't belong to this country. If you speak Iranian, there was a lot of stigma around that too. I think those years, as you said, everyone was coming from somewhere to back to Afghanistan. It was very hopeful days of Afghanistan, obviously. But it was the first time ever that we were all getting together. And as you said, it was different because the refugees that came from Pakistan were very different from those who came from Iran. I mean, I agree with you that those who came from Pakistan, for example, they were really good in English. They were really good in computer. I remember that they were the ones who started establishing these institutes where you could go and learn English. And those who came from Iran were mostly artists. They were the ones who were. I remember rappers, girls who learned a bit of. Who were singing, coming back, and the way that they. I remember that girls, teenagers who came back from Iran and they were artists. They used to shave their head, so you could clearly see the difference. You could clearly see that everyone has brought different experience to Afghanistan. And in that, I would say in that, my individual journey was the fact that I was born, in a family where I thought that my dad was very supportive of me. My parents were very supportive of my education. And then it was not only a fight in the society where I was trying to find myself, I was trying to find myself within my family as well. My extended family members were extremely conservative and traditional, and I even didn't fit in that box. The first time that my grandma told my mom that I need to wear a scarf, it's where I felt that, well, I don't belong here anymore too. And that's why my dad sent me to Kabul from Ghazni, because I was not fitting in that box. I had an orange jacket. I used to wear a hat, refusing wearing a scarf. And then I had a purple sunglass. Very colorful clothing, of course. But I was wearing jeans and t-shirts. So this was not usual back in the village that my parents were living. So my dad sent me to Kabul. And I think few years in Kabul, I was living with my uncle. And those are the years that I was really trying to find out who I am. And how am I going to fit in this country? Again, it was hopeful days. I was still very young. I used to go to school. I started learning Pashto. Most of the Afghan refugees who came back from Iran, even you would see that they are not able to speak Pashto, because Pashto, you start learning Pashto from 4th grade in Afghanistan. And I was, of course, I came later. So, but as I said, I'm good. I think it helped. I was good in adopting accent and languages. So I learned Pashto very quickly. I learned the Kabuli accent. I speak Herati accent very fluently as well. And these are the things that really helped me. So it was not that easy to say. Even when I speak, if I want to switch to Iranian native Farsi, I can do that now. And sometimes my friends are surprised, and they're like, "We never knew you lived in Iran." And I usually say, "Well, I was born in Iran. This is the first ever accent that I was being exposed to as a child when I was learning my mother tongue." But I think I was very hopeful and too young to understand the complexities of around the fact that it would be a very different life that I'm going to live in Afghanistan. I was very hopeful, and then my parents. My parents came back to Afghanistan very hopeful. I came with this idea that I'm going to change something in Afghanistan. And I believed to the fact that I will contribute to a bit to Afghanistan. And that's what my parents wanted me to do. And that's what my parents kept reminding me that we invested on you, our time, our energy, our support and everything. And we want you to be able to give it back to people around you. And,
you are a, one of the most driven, kind of objective focused person that I've known. But I'm kind of intrigued as to see, because I've seen you work, you're a workaholic, I don't know where you get the energy, the drive, the passion. What I wanted to ask you is that there must have been a point in your life that actually ignited that drive engine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And what was it? Was it something that grew gradually in you to say, okay, this is what I want? But was it that there was something that flipped? Some people go through this, some weird moment in their lives, good, bad, or whatever, that, has had the most impact on you, that has left that mark in you to be as driven as you are? I mean, is there a moment that you could go back and say, that is when I started to push towards this journey?
I remember that the first time ever that I felt that I'm being discriminated against a man is when I was 12 years old. My dad had bought me a radio. My dad is a former military officer. He was at the military at the time, and he would visit us every month, every few months. And in one of his visits, he brought me a radio. And my grandma was not happy about that. She said that, why would you bring a radio to her? She's not ours. She will get married soon, and then she's going to go, and then she's going to build a life for someone else. And she wanted me to give that radio to my cousin, who's around the same age as me. I had a huge fight with him. We literally, I remember at the time of 12 years old or something, and he was 14. We literally got physical. We started slapping each other in our faces because I did not want to give my radio away. And as I said, my extended family member were very traditional. That was the first time ever I felt that there was something here. They're trying to tell me that I don't belong even in my family. I'm going to go away. I was someone else's property. They were just waiting.
There is a saying. There is a kind of, there's a
Exactly.
saying. Dukhtar mal marduma.
Exactly. Yeah.
Daughters belong to other people. It's, if you have daughters, she is somebody else's property, or eventually will become somebody else's property.
As much as I loved my grandma, and as much as I had lots of respect for her, and later in my life, when I proved myself, she became a huge supporter of me. It was those years that I definitely decided that I will continue. I knew that I want to go to university. I knew that I want to study law. And I even fought for that because even my parents didn't want me to become a lawyer. But try to think from a 12 years old girl perspective. I knew that I wanted to study law to be able to stand for the rights of women. And by women, I was thinking of my aunts, I was thinking of my cousins, and people are surrounded by me, even my mother, who would compromise on all of those things. I never saw my mom responding back to my grandma. No one confronted my grandma in the house, and I was this 12 years rebellious girl that my grandma never liked me. She always thought that I'm the person who's fighting back. I remember that she always would say that she's loud. She's loud. She's loud. She fights a lot, and she would always tell me that you will never be able to make someone lucky, because women are supposed to be silent and you're supposed to be calm, and you're not one. You're different. She never liked me until to a certain point in my life. And I think, seeing all those discriminations around my family, and definitely feeling from my extended family members, and the life that I had in Iran. I definitely witnessed an experience discrimination in Iran. I did not have the right to education. I did not belong to Iran. I could see that my parents are living in Iran, but they're not living freely. We were all scared that someday Iranian police may come to our house and may deport us back to Afghanistan. So it was. If your life is built on uncertainty, then you try to you always try to get a hold of something. And in that era, I think this is where I felt that I need to change something for myself and people around me. And from those early days, that I knew that I would like to stand for my own rights and for people around me. And that was basically my extended family members, that I wanted to stand for them.
When in 2018, when I saw you in Kabul, you were successful on, somebody who knew what she was doing, who was already well traveled, knew the ins and outs of, I suppose, politics in Afghanistan, society, her own place in that environment as well. But, Afghanistan, Kabul, that humdrum of contradictions. We're not a safe city. And it was, again, very, very difficult to survive. And anyone who's managed to survive those years are, in many ways, lucky. And you know, how you just talk about Kabul in those days.
I mean, as you said, I always say this to my friends as well. Each one of us who are out of Afghanistan or alive today, it's just total out of luck. I have lost a very close friend of mine in 2016, Samim Faramaz, which I'm sure you know about it as well. And
yeah, I have a story about that. You know, we were friends. You and I were friends. When I came to, I've been thinking about asking about him over the last couple of days of preparing for this interview, because, you know, we were exchanging messages from time to time. We're not kind of close friends as if we would confide that, you know, I'm feeling low or I'm feeling up. But we were friends, and we had an extended group of friends who were, you know, supporting each other. And we have mutual friends who'd previously been attacked, who were injured, who'd been killed in different places in Kabul. But I exactly remember there was an evening in the UK, around about 9 p.m. or something. And then I had a message from you on Facebook Messenger. And the message was something that I had just been out and we buried Samim, my friend. And I just frozen that moment of how real and how raw and fresh things were. Now, you know, when you talk about war, when you talk about terrorism, when you talk about violence, when you talk about death, you don't really feel it if it happens. You know, you may be sympathetic to the victims, you are, but you don't really feel it unless your friends are impacted by it directly. You know, people who you know. And I think that night, you know, news flashed, and I looked online, and that was when you know, that has had a long-lasting impact on Fereshta. And so been kind of agonizing about whether to ask about Samim or not. But, you know, you've taken us there, so let's do that.
I mean, I told you about Samim. It's because that, I mean, you mentioned those years were not safe. Definitely, we all knew that Afghanistan is not safe. We all knew Kabul is not a safe city. We were living in a city where every day there was an explosion. And the first reaction that we had, I remember that, was we would pick our phone and then call just to make sure that our friends are safe whenever there was an explosion. And I mean, I survived at least, I mean, 2 attacks in Kabul. My office was attacked in 2013. My workplace was in Camp Gibson, and it was attacked. I lost colleagues. My colleagues were injured, and I mean, as you said, they were all traumatic events, but we were all hopeful. And that's why we stayed. I always had the opportunity to come out, to get out of Afghanistan. It's not as if I had to stay in Afghanistan. I believed that if there is one place in this world that needs me to be there, is Afghanistan, and I still believe so. And that's why even after getting out of Afghanistan and not being in Afghanistan currently, I'm still very focused and engaged with the country. 13, 14, 15, and until what happened to Samim, which was a very, very close friend of not only mine, but the whole circle that I'm sure you know some of them. I remember that evening, Samim was working for Tulu News. He was a journalist. He was this very self-driven, amazing individual. I mean, I don't think if words would make justice to describe him. And he was very friendly. I remember I came back from work. I was very tired that evening, and I thought that I just want to relax. And I was at home. We just had dinner. I prepared a cup of tea for myself, and I started to read the book when the first explosion happened. Where I used to live was not close to the area of explosion, but those explosions, if you were living in Kabul in those days, you could still either hear the sound or the shake. And I definitely felt that it was a big explosion. The sound came and I was like, oh, okay, there is an explosion somewhere. it didn't give me that opportunity to see where it has happened. I did not I did not go to check the TV, of course. I tried to see what is happening in the social media. And in a matter of minutes, I think the second explosion happened, which was the one that took Samim from us. And I received a phone call from a close friend who said that, can you please check on Samim? He was on air. And I even didn't know that Samim had been there. I started calling him. He had two phones. He was not responding to any of those. And it was in those moments that another friend who knew that Samim has been killed in an explosion and couldn't tell me, wrote to me on Facebook. And and he told me that I think we have lost Samim. I couldn't believe that has happened. I still thought, no, he might be injured. He's somewhere. I came out of my house. I took my car out. I remember my dad asked me where I am going, and I said that I'm going to see Samim. I'm going to find him. On the way, I called some friends who I knew at the Toulon News, and I asked them, do you know where Toulon crew have been taken to? And they told me Saplal Hospital, which I hate that hospital today, because it was. We took Samim's body out of Istiklal Hospital, and I was the first person who went to the hospital, even before his family. And we struggled a bit. We were deliberating whether how to inform his family that Samim has been killed. And in a matter of 10, 15 minutes, few other friends gathered there, and we were with his body until the morning. And and he was buried the day after. It took me years to speak of this story and speak of Samim and not cry. And that's why that I believe that he never wanted us to speak of him and cry. And it may look surreal, but we, in our circles, we used to speak about what should we do after someone is being killed. So I had this conversation with Samim before, that he would tell us that if I ever get killed in one of these explosions, don't cry for me. Even the way that he wanted to be commemorated and all of those, we had spoken about that. And that's why we later had our own evening for Samim. His close friends got together and we used to tell memories about him. He definitely didn't want us to cry. But we lost Samim in that evening, and it definitely was a very sad moment. But it was the first time ever that I was reminded that death is so close to me. I have, witnessed my colleagues being killed, other friends being injured, but it was the first time ever that someone who had been so close to me was killed, and I was scared. And I was living in a constant PTSD, I think, post-traumatic disorder after that, because every sound of explosion, even if I did not know that, even if I did not know that where my brothers are for 2 hours, would make me go crazy, because I had experienced and I knew that this can happen and this can be real. Now that I'm speaking of those days, I think I am seeing myself as a third person. I have asked this question for myself, that will I be able to live that life again? And I don't really. It was a life constantly seeing people getting killed around you, explosions happening everywhere. You're losing your close friends, you're losing your family members, because I later lost, my second cousin in an explosion in Deshtabarchi as well. I don't think if I can live that life again. I don't know how we survived mentally. I don't know how we survived those days.
I think is for you, the job that you're doing, you had managed to, you travel to the US, Europe, but what was it? You'd had the opportunity to get yourself out of that place where you had to, mentally and emotionally agonize every time you went out. But what was it that kept you going back? Couldn't you just get out and, take one of those opportunities? And the reason I'm asking is, I'll ask you next.
I love Kabul. I love Kabul as a city. I wrote an article last year around the second anniversary of the Taliban takeover, which was published in The Hill, and the whole op-ed is about Kabul. John, whenever we are speaking of Kabul, for us, it's Kabul John. And in that op-ed, I explained that John is a word that we usually add. It's a term of endearment that we add to individuals. But Kabul is the only capital in the world that holds that. I believe Kabul is a very strong city. It has seen good days and bad days, and it still stands there. And I think Kabul needs us. I never wanted to leave Afghanistan. And I'm counting the days to be able to go back to Afghanistan.
So you got the Chevening Scholar scholarship and came to the UK to Aberdeen University. So talk about your Aberdeen days.
Scotland definitely is a second home for me. Scotland is after Kabul is where I feel I belong to. And I think it's because it's where it's helped me to find my own peace of mind. When I came to Aberdeen, when I came to Scotland to do my master's, I was looking for a small city. I was looking for a place where the law school was in good in ranking. I definitely did not want to go to, London. I usually like smaller, calmer towns, and that's why I chose Aberdeen. In Scotland, after a few months, it was the first time ever that I found out that, well, I'm depressed, I have PTSD, I have anxiety, I have panic attacks. And it's because that when you're living in that conflict zone, that's a survival mood. You suppress all your feelings, and you don't have the opportunity to bring those up and to speak about them. And once you are somewhere that you feel relatively safe, all those surface. And it was in Scotland for the first time when I was depressed, when I had my panic attacks, and then I went through all those phases, and Scotland helped me to get through that. The nature of Scotland is quite similar to Afghanistan. People are very warm and friendly there. I had a very good circle of friends there who knew I came from Afghanistan. It was a happy year. In Scotland, I had a lot of discussions with my friends about Afghanistan. I was one of the very first Afghans who studied in Aberdeen Law School. The first day that I walked into the law school, I remember that I looked at there was a world map there, and the countries that Aberdeen Law School had hosted students from were pinned. Afghanistan was not that. And there was another Chevener with me who was from Afghanistan too, and we both pinned Afghanistan.
So you put Afghanistan in the Aberdeen map?
Yes, it was, I studied international law and strategic studies, and part of my strategic studies course, our professor who had taught strategic studies for 40 years had never had an Afghan student. So I went to a class. He was the one who sent me an email 2 weeks before actually I went to Scotland because my visa was delayed. I'm sure you know it was a disaster to get a UK visa. My visa was delayed. I came to join my course late. I received an email from my professor from Scotland, and he was like, "Where are you? You're in my list." And he had and these are the things that, I was being told later, that he goes to the class and he says that, well, this year we have a student coming from Afghanistan, and in the strategic studies course, Afghanistan was an example for many of our modules. Counterterrorism, a limited war, counterinsurgency, all of these, Afghanistan was an example. And it was the first time ever that he had a student in the class who could speak about what actually was happening in the ground. And my European course mates, I remember the first time, the way that they were our very first conversations, they were interested to hear more, but they were not sure about the image that they had from Afghanistan was very different from the Afghanistan they had lived in, and they were surprised. So, I still have a very strong relation and a very special bond with Scotland. I kept going back to Scotland after the Taliban takeover of Kabul because, again, I felt that I'm homeless. I don't have home, and Scotland helped me a bit. Walking in that nature and having close friends who welcome you. And I have a very I have a friend in Scotland who told me that I wish that Scotland is the second home for those who don't have a home. So I think these are the things that helped me. But that full year in Aberdeen was a happy year and helped me a lot to get through what has happened in Afghanistan.
But when you were when you finished your studies, things were really going downhill fast in Afghanistan. I was one of the people who were trying to convince you, Fereshta, don't go, stay. It's not safe. But you know, for weeks you're agonizing on, you know, you'd need to go back because of all the investments that had been put on you. And then I was here, and we had other friends who were trying to convince you, Fereshta, don't go. It's, you know, it'll be difficult to get out. And it was during that period that the whole thing just fell apart. Now, how have you coped with that?
I don't think if I have coped. I think I have learned to manage, and I'm learning every day. I'm not saying I'm managing well. I'm not. It's very difficult to not to be in Afghanistan these days, and to see Afghanistan going back to the 90s. And I always say that with the Taliban taking over, Afghanistan has definitely gone back to the 90s with all what is happening. It's very difficult to witness all of those and not to be in Afghanistan. December 2020. Right after I was graduated, I was offered a job in London, and that's when I think, you know about my job and what I was doing in those days. It was I was working with the Afghanistan civil society to help them to represent in the Geneva conference, which was a conference that that used to be held in Geneva every 4 years to get fundings for Afghanistan. We were still hopeful. We were still working. I did not sleep nights, and I stayed up days to help this Afghan civil society to draft their statement and to be represented at the Geneva conference. And those were the days that I lost my second cousin in an explosion. And I remember that night, I was still working on the civil society position paper. When I took a break, I checked my Facebook account, and then I saw my cousins, they are changing their profile pictures to black. And I was like, what is happening?
That's the worst thing ever. I mean, one of the things I really hate about Facebook is the, you know, opening it and seeing people blackening out their profiles. It just sends a shiver down your spine every time you see somebody you know do that.
Yeah, that's my worst nightmare ever. I woke up 1st January 2024 with the worst nightmare ever. I was dreaming that my dad was killed in an explosion in Ghazni to Kabul highway. I remember that when I was dreaming, I got informed through Facebook, and I was trying to get a hold of my dad. I was calling to my dad. At the same time, I could see the pictures. I did not believe. I remember every details, the way that I saw my dad was killed in that car. A car had exploded and my dad was killed. My mom was crying, and I woke up, and it was 1st January 2024, and I was in London, and I could not move my body for 30 minutes thinking, what a life we have lived. That that could have happened, and it was that real that it could have happened. And it took me some time to reflect and convince myself that, well, you're in the UK, your family is safe, this is a nightmare, this hasn't happened. And that's how I got to know about my second cousin being killed in an explosion, in an ISKP explosion in Dashtabarchi on Maoud Educational Center. He was 17. Day and night, I was still contributing to a better Afghanistan. I was still trying to make sure that the civil society is being represented while I lost my second cousin. And that's where it was so difficult for me to stay in the UK. I was telling myself that I'm not worth more than anyone. If people are in Afghanistan, if they're there, if they're being killed, I need to go back. And I remember that, as many of friends, including you, who are trying to convince me to not go back to Afghanistan. This is a quote from a mentor that I had at the time, and she told me that if you go back to Afghanistan, you will be a number. If something happens to you, you will just turn to a number. If you want to work for Afghanistan, if you still care about Afghanistan, you need to make sure you're safe first. And December 2020 were the days I was really deliberating to go back. I just wanted to book my tickets and go back to Afghanistan, and to be able to hug my aunt who had lost her son, hug my mom, to actually see that I had lost my second cousin. To actually, I did not believe that this has happened. it definitely was a very, very difficult decision for me to be out of Afghanistan. And I cannot say that I still have coped with the fact that I am not in Afghanistan.
You've been the Human Rights Watch Afghanistan Researcher. Now, as you said, I've not seen a day without something grossly negative coming out of Afghanistan. And your job, it is day in, day out to record them, to note them, to inform people. And I was thinking about what would the impact of those doing that job would be. I mean, how do you manage? In a sense, you get up, you open your laptop, social media, anything that you do, your work's about violations of human rights. You feel it to your bones. You know what it means. But what does it do to you? And how difficult does it make for you to be emotionally involved? And the reason I'm asking this is because if it was somebody who were not attached to Afghanistan in any way, who were a Western citizen who was to do the same job as you were doing, I suppose they would have had a different reaction to the whole thing. But for you, it is different. You're emotionally involved in the whole thing. But just tell us about how it is to do the job that you're doing, and how do you get the motivation, the energy, I suppose, to carry on doing it day in, day out?
I don't manage. I live this life, and I have chosen to live this life. I mean, as you mentioned, doing the job they do right now, it's not a 9-to-5 job at all. You wake up to messages 12 a.m. midnight, people asking for help. I wake up to the news of people being tortured. I remember the first days of the Taliban takeover, I used to wake up to messages from Afghanistan, sending pictures of people being tortured, people being injured, people in, very, very, difficult pictures to look at without any warning. I remember at the time, you wouldn't receive any warning saying that, well, this is a violent picture, don't look at it. It was not like that. It took me some time to be able to dissociate a bit, and I still haven't managed that. And I'm not saying that I have rocked it, not at all. I'm still struggling. This is a very emotional job that I am doing. I'm not reporting only on people of Afghanistan. I report on people that I know. I report on my friends, on my family members. The dispatch that I published last year about the access to healthcare services and lack of access to healthcare services in Afghanistan is about my aunt, who died at the age of 14 because of lack of medicine in Ghazni Provincial Hospital. So I know the people they report on, and of course you're emotionally drawn into the work. It's a difficult job. You won't be able to do this job if you don't believe in what you're doing, and if you are not committed to the fact that what I'm doing may not have a huge impact, but it is changing lives. What keeps me moving to do what I'm doing in a situation where Afghanistan, it's a very great picture. It's very difficult, no matter how optimistic you are, it's very difficult to see a better Afghanistan. It's very difficult to see Afghanistan to have a better future right now. Every day we are seeing that things are getting worse. There is more crackdown. There are more restrictions on women and men in Afghanistan. So it's very difficult to stay hopeful. But definitely women of Afghanistan in the streets of Afghanistan are my inspiration. Women in Afghanistan who are running underground schools are my inspiration. They are contributing. I think they are the one who are actually fighting for a better Afghanistan. And me as a person who is out of Afghanistan right now, who has the privilege to have a voice, privileged enough to have a safe life, and being somewhere that at least the Taliban cannot physically touch me and put my life in danger here. I feel morally obligated to amplify that voice, and that's why I'm still doing this job. And that's why I feel that this is what I need to do. I have thought of What else do I want to do? If I leave this job and if I totally want to dissociate from Afghanistan, what else would I like to do? Because I am a lawyer by training, and I would be able to build a new life in the UK. It's nothing. I still want to be.
But the issue is that you'd know more than anyone, because 2.5 years plus is a long time, to desensitize people against all sorts of things. You can make the argument that human rights, all the values that come with it, are pretty much secondary to geopolitics of the world, of the region. But mainly, your work at the Human Rights Watch is to gather evidence, to inform the public and influence policymakers around the world. Now, given how, the potential, not the potential, people are really desensitized to, we expect everything that comes out of Afghanistan as a given. I'm not surprised anything that happens in Afghanistan. You're not surprised. People you work with are not surprised. Policymakers are not surprised. Everything is accounted for. They're all part of the package that is the Taliban. So, how difficult that makes your job, given the reality of people's emotions, reactions, conflicts going on around Sudan, Gaza, and you just open a news website, you can see Afghanistan no longer features on the first 10 pages. It doesn't matter how the Taliban react and do, it just doesn't get the traction. So how difficult that makes your job?
Very difficult. It's very difficult to stay hopeful in Afghanistan, as you mentioned. I have been, we're not only doing the research and documenting what is happening on the ground, we have been involved in lots of advocacy around it. As you said, the policymakers, the diplomats who are still involved in Afghanistan. I have been traveling constantly. At least 2023 was a year that I have been on the road, from Australia to the US to European countries, just to make sure that these diplomats know what is happening on the ground. I believe some of us still need to do the job, and I have come to this conclusion that what we do right now is down to documentation. It's very difficult to change anything on the ground, but we're still trying to document the violations that are happening. And if ever one day there's accountability for Afghanistan, there is the history has recorded what the Taliban have done to women of Afghanistan and to everyone in the country. I think that's one part of there's some of us need to stay hopeful. And again, if women in Afghanistan are still hopeful and fighting, who we are to not push those voices. And for me, the thinking of a better Afghanistan, thinking of any change, I think it will happen from inside Afghanistan. And I'm just here as a person who's trying to be that bridge to support the local voices inside Afghanistan who want a better, who want a different Afghanistan than what it is right now. It's very difficult to bring Afghanistan back to the headlines. When the war started in Ukraine, Afghanistan was out of the headline. Now we have the situation in Gaza, which...
Ukraine is out of the headline?
See, that's what happens. One crisis after another one, and then what happens is usually that the older crisis usually loses out, and Afghanistan has lost it out. The thing is that what is happening in Afghanistan is getting worse, and we want to make sure that the world knows about it. It's not only the policymakers and those who can influence the change in Afghanistan. It's the public that it matters when the people in the world knows that they are living in 2024. We are half of the population in another part of the world is facing food insecurity. It makes me angry to say this, that we are waking up every day knowing the fact that people in Afghanistan are starving and will be dying out of hunger. How can this be normalized? We are waking up every day in a world that women of Afghanistan are not allowed to go to school. Girls are not allowed to go to school. So I think all of these together, some of us need to stay hopeful. And I'm
but
not
staying hopeful. I mean, staying hopeful comes with a cost. Doing what you do comes at a cost. You know, there are millions of people from Afghanistan who fled Afghanistan over the decades, but you know, the diaspora, as I've always said, you know, ballooned to massive numbers. Now you look at Europe, America, Australia, anywhere in the West, you've got a large number of people from Afghanistan scattered around. Whatever happens inside the country has a direct impact on their relationships with each other, on their relationship with their host countries, and the way they integrate, whether they're not. But also, what I see is there is this so many contradictions going and running at the same time, and there's also so much toxicity within the diasporas, and that, you know, has especially on social media, and we've sometimes talked about it as well. You know, the abuse that you get on social media for being a woman, for do what you do. I mean, I don't get a fraction of what you do, what you get. I've only recently experienced it doing this podcast, that I get abuses. I had, you know, a few weeks ago, I had, you know, my wife's photo photoshopped on Twitter, and myself and kids. I get it. You know, it's only happened to me a few times. But for women like yourself, it's constant. You have to worry about things going on in Afghanistan. You have to balance your own emotional, mental health and physical health at the same time as doing all that. But then you have to continuously worry about that as well. So you just give me a sense of how you feel about it all.
I mean, you've touched something that I usually try to ignore. I usually try to ignore what is. I believe in what I do. I believe that, and I really try to do the job in the base of my ability. Whenever we publish our reports, I mean, you may see this, that HRW is one of the very few organizations who is trying to reach out to as many provinces as we can. We are trying to reach out to rural areas and the urban areas, because living in Afghanistan, I know that there's a huge difference from the urban and rural areas, but it doesn't matter. As much as you try to, as much as you try to say, doing the job, as you said, there's always criticism. There's always people who don't like what you're doing. I have been receiving lots of messages and comments from some of the Taliban members. The first label they usually get as a woman is a prostitute. No matter what you say, no one really listens to what I say. The moment it's a woman and it speaks of women's rights, well, you're promoting Western values. I have received, lots of those kind of comments. I think I have become better in ignoring that, but it's impossible that to not be reminded of all of those at the end of your day. I also see people who value the work. I meet with local activists on a daily basis. I speak to Afghans inside Afghanistan on a daily basis, people who trust me and believe in what I do, people who feel safe to share their story with me. And that's what keeps me going. And I think I'm trying to get focused on that side of the things. As I said, it's very difficult to manage all of these together. Being out of Afghanistan doesn't mean, being out of Afghanistan by itself does not mean that, well, I have a very established life here. I am totally integrated to the UK. No, I'm not. I'm an Afghan who's living in exile, and I refuse to be identified as diaspora to this day. And this is something that I usually say, that even the word diaspora scares me, because I feel that's a distance from Afghanistan. I still want to be identified as an Afghan who lives in the UK, but planning to go back as soon as it is possible. So managing all these, all my personal life, and then, as you said, all the emotional burden of the work and the work itself, and then receiving all those, all of those abusive comments abusive comments and messages all over social media. That's why that I have minimized my presence in the social media. I'm not using Facebook anymore. I'm not using Instagram anymore. I'm only on Twitter for work. And it's because I don't want my attention to be derived to somewhere that it shouldn't. This is not something that has started from August 2021. I've lived in Afghanistan. I know that this has been an everyday battle as a woman in Afghanistan.
But what has been the impact of what you do on your family, on your parents, your brothers, your sister? How are they impacted by your work?
My parents are proud of the work I do. They're very supportive, but it has taken a bit of time and energy out of me. So in Afghanistan, as a woman, you need to, first of all, prove yourself to your family. So then they can support you. It's a phase that you need to first prove yourself, and then you will have the support. My mom is very traditional, comparing to my dad. And my mom always wanted me to be a good girl. I remember that even in Iran, when I was very young, 10, 11, she used to take me these courses where she wanted me to learn how to cook, how to sew, how to basically to be a good housewife. That's what she wanted. That's the life she wanted. She had hoped for me. And it took some time for them to, first of all, to accept that I'm not going to be the one that they want me to be. My parents literally gave up on me at a certain point of my life. When I was a teenager, I was known to be a rebellious girl. I used to confront, I used to argue. My mom didn't even know that I know how to cook until I was like 22 or 23, because I refused to cook. Even if I could cook, I would refuse to do what she wanted me to do. And at some time, it took some time for me to be able to prove myself to my family and then gain the support. And since then, they have been very supportive. I don't really know how my parents deal with receiving all these comments, because my dad follows my social media very closely, and sometimes he's the one who tells me, "Oh, these people are giving you these comments again. Just ignore them or just don't read it." That's what my dad says. I don't really know how he feels or how my mom feels seeing all of this the comments, because we haven't discussed it much. But what I know is that they believe that I can handle it. My dad, at least my dad, have said it several times that I don't worry about you. I don't worry about it. I know that you will find your way. I know that you will be able to get a hold of that. And it's nice to see that my brother, who's just turned 18 a few months ago, is identifies himself to be a feminist and very supportive of me. It's really full of joy to see that if I do a media interview or if I have spoken somewhere, then it's going to be my siblings and then my parents, the first people who would share them, or I received something from my parents about that. Yeah. So my parents are very supportive, but just to say that it took some time and energy out of me to convince them that I deserve that support, or I think I gained that support.
Fereshta, you're so incredibly inspiring. It really is a privilege to call you a friend. I remember every time you mentioned Kabul in 2021 April when we went to Kabul and you were in the UK. I remember one day I got lost in Pulsur and I had to call you. To finish, I'm lost somewhere in around Pulsur. Can you give me direction? And your blunt response was, "Don't embarrass me." So yeah, and I hope that one day we will be able to go back to that same spot where I was lost. I know where it was now because I've looked at it back on Google Map, and I know because I took some pictures. And the good thing about technology is that it tells you where you took all those photos. Now, to end this on a more brighter note, you've talked about so powerfully about the sense you're fighting to belong to wherever you've been, your hopes, your aspirations, and things that you've achieved. But on top of all those things, when you look at the future, not just of Afghanistan but Fereshta Abbasi, what is it that makes you hopeful, that you think Kabul John is mine again, And, I see an unwillingness in you, a stubbornness in you, that you don't want to make wherever you are now your permanent home. You see your home still somewhere in Kabul.
I think it's people like us who are still trying, and I think Kabul has very good friends, and it's people like us who are still trying to fight for Kabul. I know that if Afghanistan was, let's say that Afghanistan is a developed country, everything was fine there. I know that even if Afghanistan was safe, and let's say that it was a progressive country, and I was not needed to work on all these things in Afghanistan, I know that I would have worked for a different country who was still going through all these things. So I identify myself as a rights defender, as a fighter, and I know that I would have always ended being a defender or a fighter. This reminds me of the movie Butterfly Effect, because I may have lived a different life, but there's something in me that says that I would have always remained to be a fighter in whatever I do, or in whatever I had done. The love that I have for Kabul, the way that I see that the circle around me is still working for better days of Afghanistan. I do belong to these. If we came out of Afghanistan, I do belong in this bigger human rights community around the world, in this bigger human rights defenders community in the world. I'm inspired by my colleagues who are working around the world. Researchers who are working on the situation of Gaza, researchers who are working on Ukraine, on Myanmar, and all of this. And they're all hopeful that it's very difficult to say this, but I'm going to say this, that we will change this world. And
on that positive note, and on that inspiring note, Fereshta, thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure. It's been a long time coming, but great we're doing it. And thank you so much.
Thanks so much for inviting me and having me.